Headlines scream across North America. Washington announces sweeping new tariffs, targeting its oldest and closest ally. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney fires back, not with threats, but with a calculated gambit centered on Canada's most iconic export, lumber. President Trump calls it an unfair trade practice. Carney calls it a strategy for economic survival. The escalating conflict has sent shockwaves through integrated markets, threatening to shatter a century-old partnership as an August 1st deadline looms. Billions of dollars and thousands of jobs hang in the balance. How did two of the world's closest allies find themselves locked in a high-stakes battle over wood? For decades, the US-Canada border felt less like a division and more like a seam, stitching together the world's most integrated economic partnership. From the auto plants of Ontario and Michigan to the energy pipelines connecting Alberta with Texas, goods and capital flowed in a multi-trillion-dollar dance of shared prosperity. This relationship was the bedrock of North American stability, a model of collaboration built on mutual trust and deeply intertwined supply chains that powered both nations. For many, the idea of a true trade war wasn't just unlikely, it was seen as mutually assured economic destruction. But beneath this surface of harmony, a deep-seated grievance has festered for over 40 years, rooted in the vast forests that span the continent. The Canada-US softwood lumber dispute, a conflict that first ignited in 1982, represents the original crack in this economic foundation. At its core is a fundamental disagreement over how Canada sells its trees. American lumber producers argue that Canadian provinces, which own the majority of timberland, provide unfair subsidies through artificially low, government-set stumpage fees for logging. They see it as a system designed to flood the US market with cheap wood, undercutting American mills. Canada has consistently countered that these fees are not targeted, trade-distorting subsidies, but a general part of their resource management system. This decades-long cycle has led to multiple rounds of punishing tariffs and duties, impacting millions in Canadian lumber exports and thousands of jobs, particularly in the timber heartland of British Columbia. Each temporary truce has only set the stage for the next, more intense confrontation. In the early months of 2025, the 40-year fissure over lumber erupted into a full-blown economic chasm. The Trump administration, framing the move as a necessary correction to decades of economic imbalance, unleashed a stunningly aggressive trade maneuver. It wasn't just another targeted duty, it was a broadside assault, citing national security concerns under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, a powerful and controversial tool typically reserved for existential threats. The White House announced a sweeping 25% tariff on most Canadian goods. The action sent an immediate shockwave through North American markets. For lumber specifically, the administration imposed a punitive duty of 14.54%, directly targeting the heart of the long-standing dispute. But this was merely the opening salvo. The administration made it clear that this was a prelude to something far more severe, a threat to raise tariffs to an unprecedented 35% by August 1st, unless Canada capitulated to its demands. The stated justification from Washington was a narrative of American victimization. Officials argued that unfettered Canadian trade practices were hollowing out the US industrial base. They pointed to the lumber stumpage fee system as Exhibit A in a broader case against what they called unfair subsidies. The argument was that Canada was leveraging its state-owned resources to give its companies an unearned advantage, costing American jobs and depressing wages. The scope of the tariffs, however, revealed a much larger strategic objective. By simultaneously targeting Canada's auto, steel, aluminum, and copper sectors, the US was leveraging the continent's integrated supply chains as a weapon. The message was unequivocal. No industry was safe. This was economic shock and awe, designed to force Ottawa to the negotiating table on all fronts, not just lumber. The strategy was amplified by a relentless public relations campaign. President Trump's aggressive rhetoric, including a widely reported social media post musing about the economic benefits of annexing Canada, was dismissed by diplomats as absurdity, but understood by markets as a clear indicator of the administration's hardline stance. It was a deliberate tactic to create maximum psychological and political pressure, forcing Canada to choose between painful concessions or devastating economic consequences. The White House was betting that Canada, with its heavy reliance on the US market, would have no choice but to fold. Across the border, the response from Ottawa was not panic, but a display of calculated defiance. Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former governor of the Bank of England and Canada, stepped onto the world stage not as a victim, but as a strategist. Instead of engaging in a tit-for-tat tariff war, Canada unveiled its countermove, the lumber gambit. Carney's government proposed a system of export quotas on softwood lumber. On the surface, it was a concession, a way to limit the volume of Canadian wood entering the US market. But strategically, it was a masterstroke. By offering to self-regulate supply, Canada directly addressed the core American complaint of market flooding while sidestepping the contentious issue of stumpage fees. It was a move designed to de-escalate the rhetoric and transform the dispute from a political brawl into a structured negotiation. This offer was Canada's olive branch, but it came with a firm message. Canada would not be bullied into a bad deal simply to meet an arbitrary deadline. Carney publicly emphasized that the long-term health of the Canadian economy was more important than avoiding short-term pain, signaling to Washington that the pressure tactics would not work as intended. Behind the scenes, Canada was fortifying its defenses. Facing immense pressure, Carney's government rallied provincial premiers and business leaders around a domestic resilience campaign. The strategy was twofold. First, accelerate investment in national infrastructure and work to dismantle interprovincial trade barriers, long-standing hurdles that made it easier for some provinces to trade with the US than with each other. This was a long-term play to strengthen Canada's internal market and reduce its economic dependence on the United States. Second, Canada took formal action on the international stage. It initiated dispute resolution proceedings at the World Trade Organization, officially arguing that the US tariffs were illegal and violated commitments under both WTO agreements and the USMCA, the very trade deal the Trump administration had championed. This legal challenge was crucial. It framed the US not as a fair arbiter of trade, but as a rogue actor breaking established international rules. By refusing to either capitulate or escalate, Canada was reshaping the narrative, positioning itself as the reasonable partner in a dispute driven by American aggression, all while strategically preparing its economy for a future where the US was no longer its only or even primary major trading partner. And so, the two nations find themselves locked in a dangerous stalemate. The August 1st deadline looms, a fiscal cliff for North American trade. The United States continues to wield its tariffs as a sledgehammer, confident that economic pain will force Canada to buckle across multiple sectors. President Trump's administration has shown no sign of backing down, believing that any compromise would be seen as a political defeat. Meanwhile, Canada holds its ground, armed with the lumber quota proposal as a negotiating tool and a broader strategy of economic realignment. Prime Minister Carney has successfully managed public expectations, shifting the goal from a fast deal to a fair one. This isn't just about wood anymore. For the US, it's a test of its ability to use economic force to rewrite trade relationships. For Canada, it's a defining battle for its economic sovereignty. With neither side willing to blink, the deeply integ, this uncertainty trickles down with devastating speed. For the thousands of people employed in the sector, the threat is existential. A single shift reduction at a major mill can mean hundreds of jobs lost overnight, sending ripples through the entire region. Suddenly, truck drivers have fewer loads to haul, mechanics have fewer machines to service, and local businesses see their customer base shrink. The looming August 1st deadline with its threat of a 35% tariff, hangs over these communities like a guillotine. It transforms the dispute from a manageable business challenge into a potential catastrophe. While many here support Prime Minister Carney's refusal to accept a bad deal, they are also the ones on the front lines, bearing the financial and emotional burden of the standoff. The cost for them is measured in sleepless nights, depleted savings, and a growing fear that their industry, a cornerstone of Canadian identity and prosperity, is being held hostage in a political game far beyond their control. But this is not a one-sided story of Canadian pain. Thousands of miles south, the tariffs intended to punish Canada are inflicting direct and measurable harm on one of America's most vital sectors, home construction. For decades, U.S. home builders have relied on Canadian softwood lumber, particularly spruce pine fir, for its quality, consistency, and, most importantly, its predictable price. The integrated North American supply chain meant a seamless flow of materials that kept construction projects on schedule and on budget. The Trump administration's tariffs shattered that stability overnight. For a medium-sized American construction company building dozens of homes a year, the 14.54% levy isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a sudden, massive increase in the cost of their primary material. This leaves U.S. businesses in a vice. They can absorb the increased cost, wiping out their already thin profit margins. Or they can pass the cost directly to the American consumer, adding thousands of dollars to the price of a new home. In a market already strained by rising interest rates and inflation, this price hike can be the difference between a family qualifying for a mortgage or being pushed out of the market entirely. This is where the policy collides with reality. The U.S. does not have the domestic capacity to meet its own lumber demand, making Canadian imports essential. The tariffs, therefore, don't just protect American mills. They create a supply shock that punishes American builders and buyers. The very policy designed to make America stronger is making the American dream of homeownership more expensive and more elusive. It's a stark reminder that in a deeply interconnected economy, a weapon fired across the border often causes an explosion in your own backyard. The world's most integrated economic partnership now hangs in the balance, fractured by a high-stakes battle over lumber, sovereignty, and national pride. From the sawmills of British Columbia to the construction sites of Arizona, the consequences of this standoff are real, measured in lost jobs and rising costs. As the deadline approaches, both nations face a stark choice between the security of their historic alliance and the gamble of economic nationalism. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.